I had a friend say to me recently, you speak so passionately about the most obscure things. And it didn't sound exactly like a compliment. It's sort of very, very interested in very uninteresting things. But it's kind of true. Should take this off, right? It's kind of true. I'll give you just a list of some of my recent class topics, fascinating topics, including olives, the difference between oil and wax, the sciatic nerve, city wall structures, why the prayer that we refer to as having 18 blessings actually has 19 blessings, a whole lot on the relationship between Hebrew and Aramaic, and a long discussion on whether a couple of dots in the Torah are scribal notes or just accidentally spilled drops of ink. Now, I am interested in all of these things, but I can see why my friend might not be. Because really my friend is making a larger point about Jewish study in general, which is that there's so much of it that seems so arcane. Why is Judaism buried in so many details? Right? The laws of the Torah themselves, include the commingling of wool and linen, intricate temple rituals. How did the priest kill the pigeon that was offered as a sacrifice for the poor family? What happens when my ox gores your cow? Right? And then once that's just the Torah, once we get into the hair-splitting pilpul of the Talmud, then it's like all the different ways that you can transport an object on Shabbat, or all the different kinds of guarding an object for your friend, or all of the different kinds of objects that can contract ritual impurity. It's like, why? Why? Why do we keep studying this stuff instead of just focusing on what's relevant to us, or at least what's inspiring to us? Well, why all the details? So let me try to explain today a little bit my love of the details by telling you a story. And it's a story, it's a retelling of an old rabbinic story. It's a story that imagines Jacob and Joseph also sitting around and studying arcane details. So this week, this is Parshat Vayigash, and it's a very dramatic Torah reading because 22 years earlier, Jacob sent his son Joseph off to check on his brothers, and then hasn't seen him since because his brothers seized him and sold him into slavery, and Joseph ended up a slave in Egypt and then in Egyptian prison, but then remarkably rises to power in Egypt, becomes second command of all of Egypt. And when his brothers come and see him there, they at first don't recognize him, so Joseph starts messing with them, all kinds of machinations and manipulations, until finally, as Rabbi said earlier, finally there's some great moment of confrontation, and Joseph breaks down and says who he is. I'm Joseph. And the second thing he says is my father still alive? He wants to see his father. He hasn't stopped thinking about his father all these years. And surely Jacob hasn't stopped thinking about Joseph all these years, but the Joseph that Jacob is thinking about is a Joseph he presumes to be dead. So when the brothers come back and report that not only is Joseph alive, but he is the ruler over all of Egypt, and if you have a red Chumash here, this is on page 279, we read that his heart went numb. Jacob's heart went, vayafag libo, his heart went numb, for he did not believe them. His heart went numb. The Ramban says that his breathing stopped, that he was like a dead person. His heart stopped. And then suddenly, something happens that starts his heart again. This is Genesis chapter 45, verse 27. Vaidaber elav et kol divrei Yosef asher diber alehem, and they recounted all that Joseph had said to them. Vayar et ha'agalot, and when he saw the wagons, asher shalach Yosef lesetoto, that Joseph had sent to transport him, vatechiruach Yaakov avihem, then the spirit of their father Jacob revived. When They told everything to him, and they saw the wagon. So what was it that suddenly convinced Jacob that they were telling the truth, that Joseph really was alive? So there's an incredible story that appears in the commentary of Rashi. Rashi says, Masar lahem siman. Joseph gave them a sign, gave them a sign that alluded to the topic that he and Jacob were studying just before he left. The section of the Torah dealing with Eglah Arufah, the calf with the broken neck. And that is why, when it says that Jacob saw the wagons, Vayarat Agalot, that Joseph had sent, and not Pharaoh. Okay, so it's a little complicated. There's a lot to unpack here, so let me explain. It was not anything that they said that finally convinced Jacob that they were telling the truth. It was the seeing of the wagons. And it wasn't because that was proof that Joseph really was royalty now and could command wagons to be sent. No, it's the word for wagon, agalah, which sounds and looks just like the word for calf, eglah. Eglah. And so Joseph was sending a coded reference to the section of the Torah that was the last thing that they sat and studied together, a section of the Torah that speaks about the ritual of the Eglah Arufah, the calf with the broken neck. And that is something that only Jacob would know. Now, this is sort of a bizarre suggestion. The idea that they were sitting and studying Torah together, this is before the Torah was given. Right? The section actually that we're referring to is in Deuteronomy, and they're living in the book of Genesis. So even in the sequence of the Torah, they can't possibly. But this is a recurring image, an idea that the rabbis have, that these holy ancestors of ours, they had to have had some contact with the Torah. Surely they had some version of the Torah that they studied together. But what were they studying? The case of the Eglah Arufah, the case of the calf with the broken neck. So what is that case? Well, it's a situation. A person turns up dead in the middle of nowhere, out in the fields. And they measure the distance to the closest town, and the elders from that town come and they perform a ritual. They break the calf's neck, and they wash their hands, and then, and here I have... you can, if you want to see this, you can turn to page 1106. And you can see even the word there in verse 4, ha'eglah, is the same as the word for wagons. But then in verse 7 there, when they wash their hands, they make this declaration. Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Absolve, O Lord, your people Israel, whom you redeemed, and do not let the guilt for the blood of the innocent remain among your people Israel, and they will be absolved of blood guilt. Okay, that's how the elders in the closest town absolve themselves of the guilt for the death of this anonymous person in the fields. But what guilt? How do they have any guilt? Nobody, surely we do not assume that these elders murdered this person. So you may remember Rabbi Brous spoke very powerfully about this on Yom Kippur, a sermon called Living in the Plural, which is excellent. I really recommend it to you. And she spoke about this case as a template for the idea of collective responsibility, that we are all responsible for one another. And our rabbis go in very much the same direction with this case. They imagine, no, these elders didn't murder this person, but perhaps they didn't feed them. Perhaps they didn't ask them how they were doing, and critically, perhaps they didn't send them off safely. Now, though, the parallel between this case and the story of Jacob and Joseph becomes clear. Joseph, who Jacob last saw wandering out there in the fields, alone, left in the field, just like the anonymous body in this case. Jacob, who was the last elder to see him alive, who sent him off into danger. And surely on some level, Jacob must have felt responsible all these years. Where did he send Joseph? Where did Joseph go? Why did he send him off that day? And so Joseph is not just saying to his father, yes, remember, it's me. We studied this section of the Torah together. Joseph is saying, if you were worried about what you had done, if you felt guilt all these years, you are absolved. Your hands are clean. It's a brilliant connection the rabbis are making. There's a lot here, but my point is just how Joseph communicates. Joseph and Jacob have a shared language of symbols that they derived from their learning. And then the symbols become embedded with meaning, so much so that then it's not just the symbols, but related words to the symbols that can evoke that meaning for Joseph and Jacob. And that's what we get from studying Torah. A kind of symbolic mapping, a way of putting marker points, mapping meaning onto our existence. In the academic world, they would call this semiotics, right? The study of signs and symbols. But this isn't just the study of signs and symbols, but the creation of signs and symbols, marker points in our existence. And everybody does this. Maybe you have symbols. Class, what are the symbols in your family? In my family, the persimmon is loaded with meaning. Because my mom and my stepfather have a persimmon tree in the back, and my mom kind of eats them by the buckets full when they're in season. And only the hard ones, not the soft ones, and nobody else in the family likes persimmons. So persimmons are kind of a symbol for my mom's idiosyncratic joys, the way she knows exactly what she wants, and none of us quite understand her, but we all love her so dearly for all of her quirks. Right? My mom who signs off all of her texts with a bee emoji because her name is Beatrice. Right? So the bee is a symbol in our family. And in fact, my stepfather is an entomologist, so all bugs are like symbols in our family of our friends in the natural world, our little friends in the natural world. We have an affection for bugs in our family. Right? And I'm sure you have symbols in your family. What are the signs in your family? Maybe it's a hibiscus flower, or maybe it's a Joshua tree. Right? What are the things that you would put on your family crest? But if you're in the Jewish family, then olives are a symbol. Olives are not just olives. Olives are a symbol for the way that our people have been plucked and pressed and beaten, but have produced the purest, most beautiful oil that gives light in the darkest days. A sciatic nerve is not just a sciatic nerve, it's a reminder of a nighttime battle with an angel, a deep spiritual struggle with the self. And we cannot hear the sound of a ram's horn without standing again at Mount Sinai. And we cannot taste horseradish without being reminded of the tremendous suffering that our people have gone through. That's a big part of what we're doing when we study the Torah together. We are creating a symbolic mapping system that allows us to move through the world, attributing meaning to everything around us. But we do it together. And when we do it together, we learn how to communicate with each other in the deepest way. To be able to communicate meaning, deep meaning to one another with just a word or an image, the smell of a spice, the glow of a candle, the sound of a shofar, the taste of a bitter herb. When we study the Torah with all of its details, v'chol prateha v'diktukecha, all of its intricacies, then the world begins to be charged with meaning, to speak to us, and we speak to one another. When we study the Torah with all of its arcane details, we learn how to communicate to one another, sometimes without even speaking the most profound truths. So I invite you to study with me, to study the Torah with me in all of its intricacy, and together we'll learn to speak a language of truth. Shabbat Shalom.